Lonsdale 8, covering exit 1, Sam said, after zeroing her sights onto the large pair of double doors that formed the entrance of the seemingly abandoned building that apparently used to be some sort of restaurant. Cole, covering exit 2, Admir's voice replied over the comms just a breath later. He was positioned on the building's other side, where he took aim at a back entrance. Graphite, covering exit 3, Tuya announces, positioned to keep watch over what used to be the goods receipt area. Diamond and team, locking down exit 4. Andrej finally confirmed his position as well. With some help of the local security, he and a team of lower-ranking soldiers and officers had gained access to the station's maintenance area, positioned between the hull and the floor. According to the information Sheeda gave them, it was likely that their targets were using that area to move about unseen, much like Buzz had done in the past to great effect, which was why they put a greater focus on keeping that area controlled. In addition to the sniper positions, the individual exits were also guarded by groups of ground soldiers, positioned around them in key locations, though keeping a respectful distance to the building itself, since they had no way to know what would be waiting for them in there. Nobody wanted a repeat of Geralitton. According to the blueprints saved in the station's own archives, that formation should have left every possible exit under their surveillance, leaving no possibility of anyone slipping out without their notice. If their target was still in that building, he was trapped like the rat he was. Copy that, teams. Mission Control then joined in through the communication. Positions confirmed. Target position still pinged at the same coordinates. Tracking of device and tracking of call still confirm same position. Be advised, target has not moved since locating began. Proceed with caution. Copy that, Mission Control. The leader of one of the ground teams then responded, as the permission to proceed was granted. Team 5 sending in drone. Copy that, Team 5. Mission Control replied. All teams be advised. Targets might move upon notice. Permission to fire at will. An echo of various copies came over the line, as every position confirmed the order. After that, the line turned quiet as the infiltration commenced. Team 5 was positioned at the goods receipt area with Tuya, meaning that Sam did not have any visual, as the remote-controlled drone was sent in to survey the building, the internal cameras of which had been deactivated in a way that would not let them be reactivated remotely by station staff. That meant they were either destroyed, or taken over by such severe malware that it would have likely taken a Veslon to remove it in any reasonable amount of time, and there was a fat chance they would get official permission to allow it realized into the systems of the council station. By now, a whole bunch of eyes would be on the footage that drone transmitted, determined not to miss a single detail, as the building was finally combed. Since whatever they found wasn't necessary for her position, Sam wasn't privy to any of the chatter happening during exploration. She would only be tuned in if something relevant was discovered. Therefore, the air was a bit tense for the time being, as things remained quiet on her end for a while. She figured at the very least, no news meant no bad news either. That was, until suddenly, all teams, fall back. I repeat, fall back. Mission Control's orders came over the line. Establish perimeter 20 measures around the building, and cooperate with local forces to evacuate surroundings. I repeat. Sam blinked for a moment in surprise, but then quickly looked down to the team on the ground, making sure they were actually pulling back from the building. Starters, please, Mission Control. Andrej requested over the line, sounding slightly on edge, which was understandable, given that he and his team were by far in the most compromised position here, needing to crawl around under the ground to get away from the building. All teams be advised. Mission Control soon complied with the request. Anti-personnel explosive devices in large amounts discovered in the building. Vicinity of the building is to be avoided. No target discovered in the building so far. Sam swallowed as she listened in. Not that it was all too surprising to find traps during a mission like this. Hell, it was why they proceeded in the way that they did, after all. However, something about Mission Control's voice sounded tenser than usual. She had been on many missions and she knew that tone. That tone only came out when things were really out of the scope of what was planned. She could only assume that anti-personnel explosives discovered in this case didn't mean a single incendiary mine behind a door or something like that. Given what she was hearing, her mind already painted a picture of rows and rows of IEDs stacked floor to ceiling in there, even if that was possibly just a bit of an exaggeration. And the target was nowhere in sight, apparently. Still, not nearly enough time to search the entire building had passed, meaning that they still had to worry about the potential safety of the Ketsir girl. Had she possibly been left behind as bait? If that was the case, getting her out of there in a safe and timely manner may just get a little complicated. At least Shida was supposedly still on the line with her, and could tell her to remain put while they figured out how to deal with the explosives. Last thing they needed was for her to run out of that closet she was supposedly hid in, and spring whatever trap had been set up for them there. While she waited for any concrete information about that to be related, Sam could watch live how soldiers approached the surrounding buildings in order to start the evacuation efforts. Suddenly, there was a pang in the back of her head as she activated her comm line, while her heartbeat picked up significantly. "Lonsdale, all teams hold evac," she quickly ordered. And to her relief, she saw how at least the soldiers in her sight stopped in place. Still, her heart hammered tensely in her chest. "Status, please, Captain." Mission Control then chimed in a moment later, likely wondering what she was on about. "Mission Control, please confirm safety of surrounding buildings before teams proceed," Sam immediately requested, staring down at the soldiers, who now held their positions while awaiting orders. "Copy, Lonsdaleite," Mission Control quickly responded. "Security footage shows no signs of trapping. Diamond Team also confirmed no tampering in maintenance area." Sam exhaled slowly. "Mission Control, be advised," she then replied, not satisfied with that answer yet as she gripped her rifle a bit tighter. "Hostiles used an inserted footage loop on Geralitton to hide tampering and trapping of the hidden detention facility. Is there confidence that the footage has not been tampered with?" There was a moment of silence. It felt tense, although Sam wasn't sure if that was just her. "Confirmed, Lonsdaleite." Mission Control then finally came through again about 15 seconds later, which was an odd amount of time to Sam. If they knew the answer, that took way too long to confirm it. And if they needed to check first, 15 seconds was nowhere near enough time for that. "Evacuation can proceed." "Status, please, Mission Control." Sam immediately pried further, the feeling that something about that couldn't be quite right still nagging at her. "Confirmed, Lonsdaleite," Mission Control replied much quicker that time. "Confidence was confirmed by outside source Archangel." With a final kick of her heart against her ribcage, Sam finally released a relieved breath that she didn't quite realize she had been holding. That made sense. 15 seconds was short for a human, but for Archangel, which was just a codename given to a Veselon for internal communications, it was definitely more than enough to make sure there was nothing weird about that footage. Actually, most of that time was likely used to transmit the footage back and forth. "Copy that, Mission Control," she then quickly confirmed. "Teams, proceed with evac." Her heart was still stubbornly hammering for a few moments more, though she gradually calmed herself down by slowly spinning the ring on her middle finger around it in slow circles, using her ring finger and thumb. Eventually, a new wave of communications came over the line. "All teams be advised, device has been located. No signs of targets, building confirmed empty of life forms," was the all clear that she had been waiting for. Seemed like this really had just been a trap. At least there was no child that had been used as bait. Silver linings and all that. Still, that was a bit weird. The device had been found without the girl. However, since they got no information to the contrary, Shida was supposedly still on the line with her. A call redirection? Or something else? Well, that was a question for later. Right now, there were likely a whole bunch of explosives to deal with. Shida deeply scowled down at her phone, her eyes dark and focused with her ears hanging down, until they twitched up when the door opened and James entered the room. She glanced up at him for a moment before almost immediately turning her gaze back down to her phone. Her tail swayed in a constant, aggressive manner. James's face scrunched up a bit as well as he saw the scene before him. "Still hasn't hung up?" he wondered aloud as he came walking up to her, his footsteps dull in the quiet room. Shida shook her head. "Do you hear anything out of the ordinary?" she then demonstratively asked in a pretend concerned voice. The phone's speaker soon came to life. "Nah, everything's normal, far as I can tell," Sky's voice replied. "Who's with you, though?" Shida sighed. "Just James," she stated, in a mock reassuring manner. "You don't have to worry." Next to her, she could see James lift his eyebrow. Glancing at the phone, he lifted his hands, signing his question instead of asking it aloud. "What's with the theatre?" he questioned, obviously wondering why Shida was putting on a show if the whole jig was already up by now. Shida slightly twitched one of her ears before turning her head back to the phone to give another demonstration. "You know," she said, turning her voice far more cheerful and carefree that time, "there's really nothing to be concerned about. We're just taking a moment to get things in order." Almost immediately, a reply came from the speakers. "Oi!" Sky's voice rang out, though now it sounded carefully suspicious. "What's with the sewer? You doing something weird there?" James's eyebrows lifted slightly as he listened to the reaction. "Damn, that sounds real," he admitted, as his lips shifted into a concerned frown. "We're sure that's a language model and not a voice mod?" Shida had asked that question herself at first. However, there was little doubt about it at this point. "A voice mod would have hung up by now," she replied and shook her head. "But you're right. It's creepy how good it is. And you haven't even heard half of it yet." "Oi!" Sky's voice came through again, momentarily interrupting their conversation. "You know I can hear you, right?" Shida scowled at the phone with a dark glare and opened her mouth to reply. However, before she had the chance, James reached over and hung up the call. Immediately, Shida's eyes widened and her ears twitched in irritation. She whipped her face around, ready to tear into James for what the hell he thought he was doing, only to stop dead short when she looked in his tired and concerned eyes. With the wind almost immediately taken out of her sails, she sank into herself, ears and tail both falling flat as she looked down. "You're right," James said, in a gentle tone, while she was looking down at his feet, replying to a statement that she had never outright made. "Anyone would have fallen for that. I certainly would have. You did nothing wrong." He crouched down slightly, placing his right hand on her shoulder. Then he moved his organic hand up to gently lift her chin so that she would look at his face again. "Hey," he said in a soft voice, while smiling at her in a manner that was clearly meant to cheer her up, despite the exhaustion in his eyes. "You did everything right that time. No need to be upset." Shida felt a breath of reassurance build in her chest as she gently nodded against his hand. But then, she sighed out a long breath. "It just seems like we won't be able to trust anything anymore," she said, concern building up along with the reassurance, as she couldn't help but think back to the conversation she had with Sky. She had talked to and played around with language models in the past. Even some high-end ones during times when she had a good amount of money and not a lot to do with it on the GES. Still, none of them had been even close to the one she had just experienced. Even the best ones usually had a slip-up or the other. They fell in and out of accents, had some strange intonation and emphasis problems, slipped up in grammar during longer sentences and things like that. And she had most certainly never dealt with one that was able to perfectly analyze and react to whatever tone of voice someone had while talking to it. Some of them were quite good at reading and imitating emotion, yes, but quite good was not even remotely how she would describe the thing that had talked to her for the last hour. It was perfect, or at least damn close to it, and if it could imitate Sky to that degree, who knew who and what else it could copy? There certainly was no shortage of footage of James's voice out there to feed into the system. She'd slowly tilted forwards, gliding her upper body onto the table until she laid flatly against it. Despite the cool surface, she felt her face heating up as her eyes narrowed into slits. "We can already only go out with an escort, and now we have to triple-check every single call we get?" she lamented, her voice beginning to break just a little bit as all of those thoughts came down on her. What's next? Only eat what we packed ourselves, and only if we freshly break the seal? Hell, probably. And who knows when this is going to end? Her voice certainly sounded like she was complaining, but worry and sadness weren't truly what was in the forefront of her mind. No, that space was occupied by something else, something intimately familiar by now. James joined in her sighing and nodded. "This is taking on ridiculous levels by now," he agreed with her. And although he certainly tried his best to sound calm and professional, Sheeta could hear it. She could hear it in his voice that he was just as angry as she was. There was not a hint of fear there, just sheer and utter contempt. Of course, the stars knew that that was not necessarily a good thing. Even if they were in sync on this exact sort of mindset had only hours ago gotten them into trouble. But still, this just wasn't a way to live anymore. But at least no one got hurt, James then said, obviously trying to find any silver lining as he shook his head. They're sending out warnings to basically anybody we know, so hopefully nothing bad will happen overnight. And in the morning, we're going to have a big emergency meeting to discuss how to proceed. At this point, I'm certainly going to urge for a more radical approach. The question is how much the local leadership will even allow us to do. A displeased half left Sheeta's nose, as some of her displeasure boiled to the surface, her tail beginning to sway aggressively again. "Are we really still asking for permission at this point?" she growled, which just sort of came out of her without any real mental input. Intellectually, she knew it was a stupid question. She could hear James's footsteps as he moved away from behind her, which were then soon replaced by the sound of a heavy body dropping into loose sheets with a loud plomp. "I'm afraid we don't have a choice," he said, his voice a bit echoey as she spoke straight up to the ceiling. "But Zishadi and I will certainly put on the pressure now. That is to say, Zishadi is already at it. With a trap like that, who knows what could have happened if something hadn't gone to plan. There needs to be a state of general alert until the responsible people are apprehended, if not a state of emergency. Honestly, a state of emergency is likely the more sensible option." As he said that last part, James's voice made it clear that he no longer had any expectations of the sensible option winning out. "But yeah, I don't think I'll be eating at any restaurants right now," he added under his breath. Sheeta could hear how he pushed himself up onto one elbow, likely looking over at her. "Are you coming to bed?" he asked, with no pressure attached to his voice. Sheeta was quiet and thought about it for a moment. She still felt incredibly hot, and not in a good way. She wasn't sure if she wanted another body anywhere close right now. However, she also really didn't feel like sleeping alone. With a mild groan, she pushed herself up and began to make her way over. "Let's stay in our size tonight, okay?" she requested as she began to strip down. She saw in her periphery that James nodded before also peeling out of his heavier layers. "Took her long enough." Brother Abba's voice could be heard mumbling, likely indicating that the connection had been cut by the tenacious feline. "I suppose that is not bad for a first attempt," Captain Uton confirmed, briefly glancing down at his personal assistant to check on the status of the call. "Gotta say, you really are messed up, you know." The human's voice then suddenly came through again, now morphed into a deranged giggle. "Having us target her specifically, even beyond our original plan? Man, she must have really gotten to you." Uton's face darkened. Although there was no face attached to the voice, he glared down at the device. "Keep your opinions to yourself," he ordered sternly. "If we are to use that wretched thing, we may as well make full use of it. And whether I like it or not, I know Sheeta far better than any one of us knows any one of them besides that." Brother Abbott, clearly not moved even slightly by the stern words, simply snickered again. "Sure, if that makes it better for you," he said, with a tone of sickening amusement. "We'll keep up the pressure, but don't think that's going to make her go any easier on you should she ever get you in claw range." Uton exhaled a grumble, his deep urge to set that man straight internally competing with the absolute certainty that there was no ground to be gained with the Deathworlder. "I don't expect her to," he replied, ultimately giving it up. Abbott actually full on laughed that time, not bothering to restrain it with a clear sense of victory attached to it. "May the Lord help you then," he said, in a tone that was perfectly equal parts joking and almost disturbingly genuine. Once again, Uton found himself reminded that, despite his clear and severe issues, that man was nothing if not a true believer in whatever strange religion that blender of a planet had bred within its people. "Do you have the pendant that Guide Page gave you?" Uton huffed. Inadvertently, his hand reached for the small pouch that was attached to his right leg, containing some very basic items he wanted to keep on his person. He had been very tempted to toss the strange golden idol almost right after it had been handed to him by the blonde human. However, he had forgotten to do so far. Although he had briefly analysed it to make sure there was nothing sinister going on with it. But no, it was made of a solid gold alloy with no technical parts hidden inside. A symbol, nothing more. "Yes, I have it," he replied with mild annoyance, running a hand over his face as he questioned why he was even engaging with the question. Though then, a hint of spite rose up within him as he added, "Going to be a nice connection to your organization once they search my body." Abbott simply laughed again, seeming to roll with that jab near instantly. "Or was it planted there by whoever gets the killing shot?" the human countered, without any emotional movement. "A random Xeno war criminal with connections to the fell savior? A likely story. But still, feel free to use it to make your prayers." Uton shifted his lips slightly. "I was told your people dislike using that word," he commented, remembering a certain number of outraged explanations that he both saw on the news and once upon a time heard from James personally. "My people," Abbott scoffed. "My people are those who follow the path of the Lord, not merely those made in his image." Uton hummed. "And you believe that excludes people who disapprove of your expression?" he wondered, to which the human near instantly scoffed again. "What I believe is between me and the Lord," he said, his tone skirting away from amusement entirely and turning almost sinister. Uton gave the device transmitting the voice an incredulous look. "I see," he finally stated, and then simply hung up without another word. His hand then immediately moved to his pouch again, this time pulling out the small golden symbol that had been the subject of conversation. He inspected it. For a religious symbol, it had a few too many jagged edges in his opinion, though obviously every species had a different shape language programmed into their mind. Still, he couldn't help but feel the tips of the five-pointed star, and even the corners of the cross in the middle poke into his fingers, as he held the symbol between them. He inspected it for a long moment and contemplated. He had never gone through the effort to read into whatever was hidden behind the symbol. Failed savior. It made him wonder who and what was failed to be saved. And by whom exactly? The Lord that the humans kept talking about? Unlikely. They would hardly be so devoted to him if he was a failure in their eyes. But then, why was their name all about that failure? They were an odd bunch, to be sure. The will didn't have a symbol, and those who believed in it didn't have one coherent name. It was really less of a religion and more of a state of mind. Or at least Uton felt like that was the case. Use it to make his prayer, huh? The former captain could not remember if there was ever a time in his life when he had prayed. At least not seriously. Quiet urging in the back of his mind towards no one in particular. Or maybe fate itself, sure. But was that enough to be called prayer? Who would he even pray to? Though, perhaps the most pressing question should have been why he suddenly felt like he was even humouring the idea. He dropped the idol from his fingers down into his hand, looking at it as it flatly laid in the middle of his dark palm. You created humans in your image, he mumbled towards it almost absent-mindedly, as he stared at the golden shape. For a moment, it became almost mesmerizing to him. Does that mean you also watch over those who look like them? The screen flickered as it was switched from one channel to the next. The new feed became clear within less than a microsecond, now showing the slightly tilted perspective of a microphone being held up towards a himflod, who both the reporter and the camera person quite clearly had to look up to. Doesn't feel safe, you know, the large man said, shaking his truly massive head a little bit as he stared down into the camera way too directly. I mean, I understand what they are doing, and I understand that it must be hard on them and so on. But if their presence here is going to cause things like that... I mean, I've met children who played in that building after it was evicted, you know? What if they had gone in there? Is that really worth staying around here just to be a bit quicker to your seat if you win the election? With a groan, Finn lifted his hand to change the channel. Or you could just be mad at the people who planted the bombs, instead of the ones they were trying to blow up, you blubbery waste of carbohydrates, the old man grumbled, while the channel switched to the next. It switched to yet another interview, though the person being filmed this time was clearly more comfortable with being in front of a camera, even if the angle was just as tilted as the one before, as he had once again managed to tune in right as one of the even more giant people of the galaxy was being interviewed. Finn actually recognised that spindly-looking half-bat, half-brontosaur this time, given that he was part of the acting council. We're working closely with our local forces to ensure the area is cleared of any harmful devices, Acting Councilman Vuhushwa assured the reporter in a professional manner, his long neck bending down slightly to allow him to look impassively at the person interviewing him. Such hostilities, as well as obvious attempts at election interference, will not be tolerated, and we have already begun the process of increasing security even further in order to ensure the safety of those who wish to visit this historic place for such a historic occasion. The microphone was briefly retracted, so the interviewer could ask a follow-up question. You wish to increase security even further? However, at which point would you say it is prudent to, so to speak, grab the problem by the root? The melodic voice of the reporter asked. In a practiced manner, the councilman prepared to reply right away. However, his automatism was then kicked in the wheels by a brief realization that washed over his long face. By the look of things, the barely hidden meaning behind the question had sunken in, and it didn't seem like the whistle had landed. We are grabbing the problem by the root, he replied directly. That root are people who threaten the safety of our people, as well as our political processes through contemptible acts of violence. And we plan on making sure that they find no soil to reach out in here, in this most sacred of places for our community. Well, at least someone has a hint of a backbone, Finn mumbled again, before switching the channel once more, though he was unsure how much credit to give there, since the effectiveness and decisiveness of their grabbing the problem by the root was pretty lacking so far. The next channel showed a large rally of people, and was immediately switched away from because he wasn't even going to risk engaging with that one. At that point, he seemed to have reached some sort of entertainment channel, since his screen was suddenly consumed by bright colours and movements, with a whole bunch of animated characters who appeared to be in the middle of some sort of montage set to energetic music. He had absolutely no idea who any of those characters were or whatever the hell they were achieving in that montage, but he decided it was a good enough change of pace to get away from the politics for just a few minutes. He had absolutely no idea how his sister and nephew could stomach all that stuff on a near constant basis. He had been exposed to it this directly for less than a week now, and already he was thinking about the quickest way to make it end. He may have had the patience to raise kids and a whole litany of problem animals, but apparently politics were a step too far for him. He leaned back into his seat and allowed the strange animation to serve as white noise, while he briefly checked his phone, looking over the updates he got from friends and volunteers back home about everything going on at the compound. Luckily, everything appeared to be going just fine, and none of the animals had decided that now would be a good time to suddenly keel over, right when he was a couple of thousand light years away. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. "Password!" he yelled out, without even looking up from his phone. "Passwords are idiotic if I have to yell them through a door," a familiar voice replied, and Finn quickly made sure that the door was unlocked and opened for his visitor. In walked Commander Karina Coing, today dressed with an expression like 7 days of rain on her face. "Hey, Karina," Finn greeted her, almost immediately switching to their shared native language, instead of straining his voice by keeping up the alien speak. "Fun and joy?" "You know me, nothing but honey cakes," the young, though by now not quite so young anymore, woman replied as she walked up to him. She fell into a chair across from him and leaned back. "And call me Coco. Karina sounds so old." "I was just chatting with your parents," Finn informed with a mild chuckle, as he gave her a second to decompress. "Looks like they haven't been eaten by a tiger just yet." Coco gave a single half-hearted giggle. "If I managed to volunteer for years without losing a hand from petting the danger kitties, I'm sure they could manage," she commented in mild amusement, before letting out a long breath. "You got a few minutes?" she then finally requested, what she likely originally came for. "Haven't thrown you out yet," Finn replied as he sat up a little straighter. "True, but you wouldn't throw me out if you had a literal heart attack," Coco shot back as she also sat up. "A certain someone inherited that trait from you." Finn snorted. All right. Still, I'm probably one of the least busy people around, so go ahead and shoot," he then replied, leaning his elbows down onto his knees, as he looked at the woman he had known since she could barely spit at his knees. Coco took a preparatory breath and steadied herself. She began, immediately drifting off while clearly not sure how to continue that sentence. Ultimately, she shook her head firmly and lifted her gaze so her green eyes stared directly into his. "We need to do something about James before he gets himself hurt."